Hi, I am Tracy Leslie, Senior Pastor at Trinity United Methodist Church in downtown Lafayette, Indiana. Thank you for tuning in to this week's message. And just a reminder, if you would like to engage more with this week's message and engage with others in a context of online worship, we have Trinity Connect on Sunday mornings at 9:15. Information about Trinity Connect and the link to join via Zoom can be found on Trinity's website homepage, simply www.trinitylafayette.org. Scroll just a little way down the page and you'll see Trinity Connect and click on the green button for all the information that you'll need. Before I read this morning's gospel, which is very brief, I'd like to provide some context for the story. Jesus has already entered Jerusalem for what we today call Holy Week. It will be the last week of his earthly life. As he was approaching Jerusalem, he wept over the city and its inhabitants because of their unwillingness to, quote, recognize the things that make for peace. He has also cleansed the temple by driving out those who were engaged in sales in the temple courtyard. And although the religious leaders have been determined to put an end to Jesus, there's been this friction between them for quite some time, still every day, Jesus returns to the temple to preach and teach, a place where inevitably he will come into contact with those religious leaders who are looking for an opportunity to put an end to him. So in this brief gospel reading this morning, Jesus is at the temple. And he's surrounded by a mixed crowd, right? Some of them are these hostile religious leaders that are out to get him. His own disciples that have followed him along this journey, they are there. And there are others in the crowd, right? And who knows about them, right? Some of them may have shown up specifically to hear Jesus teach. Some of them may have just shown up to the temple for other reasons and been lured in by Jesus's teaching as they overhear it. It's hard to know. But we find this story in Luke chapter 21. Jesus looked up and saw rich people putting their gifts into the treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. He said, "Truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them, for all of them have contributed out of their abundance. But she, out of her poverty, has put in all she had to live on." When was the last time you got a handwritten thank you note? So don't think about those thank you notes that you get from charities that you support, right? And I notice nowadays they all show up along with the acknowledgement of my gift and the thanks for that. They all show up with another form and envelope to send in my next gift, right? Which just doesn't sit terribly well with me. But I'm talking to you about those handwritten, personalized thank you notes. They specifically note your gift and the difference your gift made to them. My mom raised me always to send thank you notes. Recently, I sent a thank you to someone acknowledging a gift that they'd given to Trinity. I subsequently received a note from them thanking me for my thank you note. Let's admit it, we all enjoy being thanked, having our contributions acknowledged. That is human nature, right? It makes us feel good when others notice the good that we do. It's encouraging. Most successful charitable organizations go to great lengths to demonstrate appreciation for their large donors, right? Universities and hospitals, they wine them, they dine them, they make a big deal over them. Now, no doubt those folks are generous. They've given a lot of money, but it probably doesn't hurt that in the case of the largest donors, they'll be immortalized, right, on a hospital wing or a campus building, their name right up there, right? By the way, it wasn't much different in the ancient world, where columns of ancient structures such as pagan temples. They often bore inscriptions to honor those who were patrons of that particular city, or military heroes, or those in the imperial family, right? The important folks. So it may appear bizarre and even a bit confusing when Jesus, in this gospel story I just shared with you, makes much ado over this woman who is very likely the smallest contributor to the temple that day. This woman is a widow. She's among those passing through the outer court of the temple, placing her donation into the treasury. These were trumpet-shaped chests into which people would deposit their coins in the same way that we deposit our bills, our envelopes, in offering plates today, right? Jesus apparently was positioned so that he could have a kind of wide-angle view of this collection box. Now, Luke tells us there were many rich people contributing, and no doubt the temple priests appreciated their contributions. They may have even made a big fuss over them. But it is a poor widow who attracts the attention of Jesus. She is the focus of what becomes a teachable moment as Jesus addresses his disciples. She, Jesus informs them, has made the largest contribution of all. Now, obviously, Jesus wasn't speaking in a strict monetary sense, right? Because this woman only deposits 2 small coins. If you grew up hearing the King James Version of the Bible, you might know those coins as mites. But technically, they were lepton. Now, lepton are no longer in circulation. And I don't want to turn this message into a lesson on ancient currency, although I find some of that kind of fascinating. But anyway, roughly speaking, I've done the math and the research and the subsequent math. And this woman's offering that day amounted to what would have been about $7.50 today. A donation of $7.50. That's not going to go very far nowadays, right? With covering church expenses like utility bills and staffing costs, right? But as I say, Jesus's response was focused on more than the strict economics. And we know that because of his subsequent words. Jesus says that this woman's contribution has been the greatest of all because while others contributed out of their surplus, kind of their leftovers, she contributed out of her need. The amount she gave was all she had to live on. She's truly given her whole self. She's given the entirety of her resources. The final statement, that statement that the widow has given, quote, all she had to live on, well, that takes us back to another teachable moment earlier in the 10th chapter of Luke, in verses 25 to 28, when we read about an expert in Jewish law or commandments who approached Jesus to inquire of him what he must do in order to inherit eternal life. Jesus's response is that one should love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. 4 times Jesus says all. One might think for efficiency's sake, Jesus would have simply said, with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. But that word, all, in Greek, it's the word holos, and it's a word worth repeating and emphasizing because it expresses the concept of entirety, completeness, wholeness. Small word, but a big idea. It wasn't the amount the woman gave that Jesus praised. It was instead the reality that Jesus knew to be true of her. Through her giving, she offered up all of herself, all her life, all her resources she had to give, she gave. In doing that, She demonstrated a love that encompassed all of her heart, all of her soul, all of her strength, all of her mind. What she gave demonstrated a love that was whole and complete. Now, if you're a pragmatist like me, you might wonder if the woman gave everything she had to live on, what was going to happen when it came time for her next meal? Well, neither Jesus nor the gospel writer say. We don't know. But perhaps the very absence of the need to address that question should cause us to reflect on how a love so complete, so whole, leads to a trust so deep as to eradicate the need for the question. Let me say that again. The depth of this woman's love for God and her trust in God eradicate the need to ask these kinds of questions. Think about it. If your child or spouse on your insurance plan needed a life-saving surgery and you knew it would still involve an astronomical out-of-pocket expense to you, if you knew that what your loved one needed from you would cause this astronomical expense, that wouldn't cause you to hesitate, though, would it? It wouldn't raise the question of whether or not you should or shouldn't, wouldn't even raise the question of how you would continue to pay off this expense. Because love doesn't pinch pennies. Love isn't terribly practical. Love often doesn't question much. Let me say that again. It's the key to this story. A love like this widow displayed, a love which is so complete, leads to a trust so deep. Questions about our future security no longer hold us captive. Let me say one more thing about this story. It's certainly not an indicator that Jesus is unconcerned with the plight of the poor and their vulnerability. In fact, he is quite direct in pointing out that the scribes have exploited these poor widows, and they're going to be punished for it. God, Jesus, are most certainly concerned about the poor. This widow isn't praised because she's poor and vulnerable. Neither is she condemned because she's poor and vulnerable. Her poverty is merely a fact. It's her reality. But in the midst of her poverty, she has chosen to place her trust in God and to demonstrate her love for God and her neighbor by offering up all of her life, represented by a measly $7.50. It's a pretty paltry sum, but it is a mighty and generous gift. This woman becomes an illustration of what it means to truly trust in God. While Jesus has been speaking to his disciples about his coming death, while Jesus has been teaching his disciples that they must be willing to pick up their cross, while Jesus has been struggling to help his disciples comprehend that the first shall be last and the last shall be first, the disciples have been fearful. The disciples have been fearful, clueless, even competitive. They want the good they're doing and the contributions they're making to be duly noted. They cannot even begin to comprehend a Messiah who will, out of his great love, offer up his entire life on a cross. And yet this widow surrenders all that she has. And her great act of love and faith is pointed out, duly noted by a Savior whose own life is a portrait of surrendering love. Friends, this morning marks the conclusion of Trinity's Fall Stewardship campaign in blank we trust. I've been saying it's your invitation to fill in that blank. What do you really trust in? I hope that this series has provoked you to think a little bit more about where your trust is placed and how that is reflected in the way that you live. I hope that all of you have turned in your pledge card, your estimate of giving to Trinity in 2023. That's important information for the church's governing board to have. It's super helpful as we plan our ministry in the upcoming year. But those cards represent far more than those numbers. They're far more significant than numbers for budgeting purposes. There's a more important reason for those cards. Those cards provide you with the opportunity to prayerfully, I hope, discern what kind of number demonstrates a love for God that encompasses all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your strength, and all of your mind. What does your gift, your commitment, say about the surrendering of your entire self to God?